Good evening. I'm Mike Gilliam, and welcome to this Files One special report, Sandy, 2 years later. The superstorm was vicious, leaving $62 billion worth of damage as it slammed into New York and New Jersey. And now, 24 months later, much of the recovery and rebuilding is done, but there's still more to do. Exactly 2 years ago, Sandy made landfall, becoming one of the biggest natural disasters to hit Long Island, especially the South Shore. 7 to 10-foot storm surges crashed onto the beaches and streets. Lives were lost, thousands of homes destroyed. The catastrophic flooding severely damaged 28 fire stations, 26 schools, 3 police stations, and a medical center, which is still closed today. Over the next half hour, we'll take you on a tour across the island to show you how far rebuilding efforts have come. We'll catch up with some of the people we first introduced you to immediately after the storm hit and have been following for the past 2 years. And we'll speak with homeowners and business owners who are still struggling, fighting to get the money they need to rebuild. And we'll introduce you to the heroes who still to this day are helping those in need. We begin in Long Beach, one of the worst hit communities. Over the past 2 years, much has been done to bring the city back. There's a new boardwalk, and officials say the summer season was successful, but there are still scores of families waiting to go back home. Files One's Jody Goldberg has been following this story from day one and revisits the city by the sea for us.
I can't say it won't happen again, but the chances are pretty slim.
So says Kenny Kramer, who recently moved to Long Beach from Stony Brook. Kenny, like so many others, stroll the boardwalk on beautiful afternoons like this one, something that simply wasn't possible in the days, weeks, and even months following Superstorm Sandy. That's because this is what it looked like on the night of Monday, October 29th, 2012, from the 4th floor of the Alegria Hotel on National Boulevard. Many parts of the city of Long Beach were completely submerged under several feet of ocean water. Superstorm Sandy struck with such force that once the water finally receded, the city was rendered powerless, leaving many to wonder whether Long Beach would ever bounce back. And 2 years later, it has.
It's hard to believe that it's already been 2 years. You know, it feels like it's been one long day.
Long Beach City Manager Jack Schneerman remembers how bad things were, both during and after the storm. These are some of the images that are now permanently embedded in his and many other people's minds. But now, 2 years after the superstorm, the city is back. However, there are still some notable exceptions.
I would say Long Beach is better than ever, but we are still very much a work in progress. We're still rebuilding. The work is certainly not done. It's far from over. We've got a long way to go. We've come so far already.
And so far is progress on Samantha Kinsley's West End home. You may remember we caught up with Sam, who symbolically wrapped her house in red tape as a sign of disgust at the federal government's red tape that she says has prevented her from receiving the adequate funds she needs to rebuild.
It's hard to believe that only 2 years have passed. Then you think about the things that you've missed out or the time that you spent trying to get home rather than the time you should have spent trying to live your life.
And although home since May of this year, the job still isn't complete. Sam is still seeking more funding to get everything back to where it once was.
It feels like we're home because the houses across the street are still the same, but it doesn't feel like we're home because the houses next door and all down the row are either demolished or different. So it's kind of like a mixed feeling.
Back in business since May of 2013 is the Long Beach Surf Shop here on West Park Avenue. Owner Luke Hamlet says pictures he took of his store do the damage no justice.
We knew it was a big storm, so we took stuff up high, but nobody imagined it was going to. There was 3 feet of water throughout those stores.
And in the dark clouds that represented Superstorm Sandy, Luke says at least nowadays there is a silver lining.
It's a way better store than it ever would have been. Yeah, and we would never had the opportunity to do that without the storm.
And just 1 mile east is the community of Lido Beach, also hard hit by Superstorm Sandy.
Here we are, better than before.
We told you Kim Takal and Pamela Ehrlich's story back in 2012 and how the Lido Beach family was forced out of their home, which ironically enough had recently been remodeled. Add insult to injury, the gym they belonged to had also been destroyed. So they took matters into their own hands, starting their own business, Coco Fit Club, on East Park Avenue in Long Beach.
You know, you always go, what's my life going to be like in 5 years and 10 years? And so when this opportunity came up because of Sandy, and because our gym closed and we joined this gym, you know, and just loved it, it presented an opportunity that we wouldn't have imagined would have happened either so soon or so wonderfully.
We can set up a demo.
The 1,600 square foot gym gives these two a reason to anchor themselves back into the community they love, crediting Sandy for washing something so special to them ashore.
We found ourselves in a situation where we needed to find a new gym. We found a new gym, and we ended up becoming the proud new owners of the gym.
Superstorm Sandy may have roared through this seaside city 2 years ago, but for many who work and live here, it seems like just yesterday. Yes, a brand new and far sturdier boardwalk has been built for all to enjoy. However, there are still plenty of folks who continue to cope with the painful effects of such a devastating storm.
For the most part, it's 90% positive because most of the city has come back. And I'm very happy about that. The sad thing is that there's too many of my neighbors that are still out of their homes, so it's up and down.
I'm very, very sad for the people who were affected, even though we weren't. It's very, very unfortunate for all those people who are still living displaced lives.
And while Superstorm Sandy may have permanently driven some folks out of Long Beach, Kenny is drawn to the city by the sea.
I always wanted to live near the beach, so here's my dream.
Reporting from Long Beach, Jody Goldberg, FiOS 1 News.
Neighboring Island Park wasn't spared by Sandy's wrath. Hundreds of homes there were damaged or destroyed. And now, 2 years later, the rebuilding is still happening. And there's one program that is lending a hand to help families go home. FiOS 1's Kevin Vesey has this part of the Sandy recovery story.
Island Park resident Terry Reichel considers herself lucky that her family has a house to live in after Hurricane Sandy brought in more than 3 feet of water, destroying the entire first floor.
There was no place to sleep, no place to cook. We had no power, no electricity, no heat, no water.
But 2 years after the storm, Terry, her husband, and their 4 kids are still living in an unfinished home. The walls have been left unpainted, doors and molding are missing, and work hasn't even started on this bathroom. The reason for the delay? Terry and her husband want to elevate their house, but can't because they're waiting for federal disaster relief money being awarded by a state agency called New York Rising.
And our patience is kind of running out. We're going to spend another Christmas in the house that is not our home.
The family was made an offer, but Reichel says that amount would only pay for about 1/3 of the elevation job. Her architect and contractor are challenging the federal grant and appealing for more money. Reichel says the process has been difficult and confusing.
It's frustrating. It's upsetting. It's depressing. It's not easy. But we don't really have much of a choice at this point.
We understand that there are some confusing things about this process. The nature of the process is confusing. It's a disaster recovery process.
We spoke one-on-one with Governor Cuomo's storm recovery advisor, John Kamen, who heads New York Rising. Because the money being awarded to Sandy victims comes from taxpayers, Kamen says the agency has to comply with dozens of federal rules designed to prevent fraud.
Our goal is to give the right amount, but it can't just be any amount. You can't say, well, we want $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. That's not how the program works.
All told, New York Rising has doled out nearly $500 million to around 10,000 homeowners statewide, with the lion's share going to Long Island.
We have about 550 applicants, homeowners in Island Park. We've distributed or awarded, I should say, about $32 million just in Island Park.
John Kamen has taken a very hands-on approach. As a result, it's coming along beautifully.
Now, in addition to helping residents fix or in some cases rebuild their homes, New York Rising is behind a community reconstruction program. The village mayor says the main project will be fixing storm drains like this, which he says are basically useless during high tide.
Once the tide level drops, the water starts to recede, but it's slow and arduous. They're inefficient, not effective. It's time.
But some residents don't even have a house to go home to. Mary Ellen Malone tore hers down last December and says New York Rising will only give her $84,000. Not enough to rebuild.
Just buy me out. Give me fair market value for my house and my property and let me move on. Let me get past this.
Meanwhile, Terry is struggling with the thought of spending yet another year in an unfinished, unelevated house.
At this point, it's very, very difficult to come to a 2-year anniversary and still be in the same position that we were in. It's very difficult. We just want to know when, a real when.
Our goal really is to get this money to the homeowners as quickly as possible, get their homes repaired, rebuilt, get them back in their homes, get our communities rebuilt as well, and built stronger, more resilient, and in a way that helps us as a community in the future respond to storms that come our way.
In Island Park, Kevin Vesey, FiOS 1 News.
There's still more ahead on Sandy 2 years later. We're heading out east on the island, where we'll hear from people still struggling to rebuild and what obstacles they're facing, and how some organizations are trying to help. Then to the North Shore, where we'll revisit Bayville, which was heavily flooded right after the storm, and find out how the community is doing today. And later, how a little boy's wish is making dreams come true for Sandy victims on the island. The inspiring story when we come back. Welcome back to this FiOS 1 News special presentation, Sandy 2 years later. Our tour of the island moves east now to Suffolk, specifically to the hard-hit areas of Lindenhurst and Babylon. For most, Sandy is now a distant memory, but sadly, there are some who are still living with the storm's wrath. FiOS 1 Sherry Richardson has their story.
Lynn Ferrandino has lived in Lindenhurst since she was 3 years old. When Hurricane Sandy flooded her home, she thought she'd be okay.
I have good insurance. I've had flood insurance 40 years we've been here. And flood insurance paid for a lot, but of course not everything. And the major part was the holes in my foundation that weren't there before.
Insurance wouldn't cover that, so she couldn't begin the process of elevating her home and rebuilding. She went to an informational meeting for help, and that's when she met Teresa Regnante of the United Way of Long Island. Lynn calls her her angel.
She sat there and she said, well, do you have a special talent? I said, I watch grandkids and I cook. That's what I do. So she said, if you cook for my guys, I'll take care of your foundation. And I just, excuse me, can you repeat that? And she said it again, and I just welled up, and it was like a big burden lifted off of my shoulder.
That was back in November of 2012. It wasn't until May of this year that she was finally back home. But others aren't as fortunate. Ed Anderson lives a few miles away from Lynn in Babylon. He's battling leukemia and is a single father. 2 years after Sandy, he's still struggling, not yet able to rebuild.
Every day that I can set 2 feet down on the ground, I'm happy. So for me, you know, it's just, it's not as big a bump in the road as that was. But I also have a daughter who lives with me. I'm a single father, and it was rough on her.
Ed and his daughter are renting an apartment, but he's still paying mortgage on a home that no longer exists. This summer, volunteers helped him tear it down. His flood insurance didn't cover as much as he had hoped.
I had to fall back on New York Rising, and New York Rising is, it's just a difficult process to get through. It's frustrating. It's just seems like a never-ending battle.
Right now, he's still waiting for funds.
Knowing from the cases of people who are back in their homes and people who aren't in their homes, and the best way to describe this is everything is a snowflake for Long Island.
Meaning every case is different. Take, for instance, Carmela Sasante. She says her bank put her in a program where instead of paying her mortgage, she could use that money to make repairs. Now she says her bank wants to collect.
I don't want to lose my home. I don't want to go anywhere. Nope. Now we're going to foreclose. So now that you put all your money into fixing it, they want to foreclose. What do you do?
Experts say navigating through all the rules and regulations can be stressful. So much so, some people are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder.
For more individuals than not, they have not yet been able to put all the pieces back together because the recovery, the impact has been so significant and so complex. And so we're working with our partners who are already serving children that may, get nervous when it rains. If they see the water coming up, they have anxiety again about what happened and what transpired 2 years ago.
Village officials say they are doing everything they can to help their residents.
We just extended our period of time for building permits and not charging families for them. We're still taking debris away. What I'm disappointed in is really New York State and the lack of money for these people. It's starting to come around, but it's slow in coming.
The village, too, is waiting to be reimbursed. Officials estimate Hurricane Sandy cost the village around $2 million in damage and repairs. That includes removing around 10,000 tons of debris, fixing roads and parks, and making enhancements to this marina like these power pedestals that are now removable.
Not only are we looking to recover from what happened, but we're looking to improve things or mitigate our situation so we can hopefully prevent significant damage in the future. And our village marina is a good example of that. In the hopefully unlikely event of another major storm, we could actually dismantle the top portions of these pedestals. That'll save all the internal electronic and water valves.
He says there is still more work to be done. As for homeowners, Lynn is looking forward to spending the holidays at home. It's been 2 years since she's been able to do so. Ed says seeing that his neighbors are making it back, he's hopeful.
I'm extremely happy for everybody, and I know it's been a long struggle for everybody. It hasn't been easy for, I don't think, one person. So I'm very happy, and yes, it does give me hope.
On this, the second anniversary of Sandy, community leaders urge those who were not impacted to remember that there are many people still in dire situations and that you can help by donating or volunteering your time.
And for those individuals that have been impacted directly by the storm and have not yet come forward for whatever reason, that there is help out there and that there are people committed to seeing you through your recovery.
For more information on where to go for help or how you can help, go to our Long Island Facebook page. In Lindenhurst, Sherry Richardson, FiOS 1 News.
And coming up on Sandy 2 years later, how New York Rising, announced by Governor Cuomo in 2013, is helping storm-ravaged communities develop and implement reconstruction plans that will allow them to be resilient physically, socially, and economically. Then a 5-year-old's wish to help others in need more than a decade ago inspired a program that is helping rebuild homes and lives. It's truly a story of heroes on our island. We'll be right back. Welcome back. On the North Shore, the small village of Bayville is virtually surrounded by water. And even when there's a minor storm, there can be lots of flooding. And that was certainly the case on October 29th in 2012. Floodwaters cutting off Bayville from the rest of the island and causing tens of thousands of dollars in damage. FiOS 1's Ron Lee went there to find out how homeowners are doing 2 years later.
Homeowner Katie Byrne of Bayville tells me in the 2 years since Superstorm Sandy unleashed a beating not only on her home, but on all the homes here on 16th Street, she and her neighbors have come a long way to rebuild their lives. However, due to high costs, it's taken a lot longer to rebuild their homes.
The house next door is a ranch, and they lost their entire first floor. The people that are over there are just moving back in now. He's just not even in yet. Pretty much this whole street was a lot of damage, tremendous amount of damage.
Bayville is a village of 7,000 people, less than 1.5 square miles, and virtually surrounded by water. As you can see from these online videos, several neighbors captured what they could of this ferocious storm. 2 years later, the neighbors who Katie says are still in the process of moving back into this house declined our invitation to share their story. Katie, however, had no problem showing me some of the damage.
This was all trees here. They're all gone. This was all a big row of hemlocks.
And the repairs that she and her family have put into a house that they have called home for the past 12 years.
It was up to here. Crazy times. We're trying to put everything, still trying to put it back together.
After Sandy hit, Katie says it took several days for the water table to recede around her home. During that time of heavy flooding, she and her family took shelter at this hotel in nearby Glen Cove, staying there 3.5 weeks. While her house is still not in the condition she would like for it to be, Katie tells me in the past year, she and her husband decided to pour money and effort into fixing their front staircase and the flooring of their porch. She says both were severely compromised by Sandy.
We did get some money from FEMA and from our insurance. I did apply for New York Rising, and we're working with them right now to try to cover some of the costs that were not covered at the time. But you know, you just do what you can, a little bit at a time, and just go on with life and say my house doesn't look fantastic, but it is what it is. My kids are safe. We're okay.
Speaking of New York Rising, which is short for the New York Rising Community Reconstruction Program, the village of Bayville is hoping to make some major infrastructure improvements in connection with this program. The mission of New York Rising, announced by Governor Cuomo in April of 2013, is to help storm-ravaged communities develop and implement reconstruction plans that will allow them to be resilient physically, socially, and economically. Devising a storm mitigation plan is a straightforward task for most Long Island communities, but not for Bayville. It's a village that some cynics have called a glorified sand dune. Despite this, the planning committee for Bayville New York Rising is proposing the construction of pump stations, which would mitigate the flooding of roads, homes, and businesses in the village's east end by controlling stormwater flow. Another project being proposed is the construction of a barrier on Pine Lane, adjacent to Long Island Sound. The hope is that this barrier would prevent tidal surge from flooding streets, homes, and businesses in this area of the village's east end.
And up next on Sandy 2 years later, a little boy's wish to help those in need was the inspiration for a program that's touching the lives of Long Islanders hurt by Sandy. We'll be right back. We're back with a special presentation, Sandy 2 years later. A 5-year-old's wish to help others in need more than a decade ago has inspired a program that is helping rebuild homes and lives. It's truly a story of heroes on our island. Christine Persichetti reports.
Anthony Henry doesn't mind loading the dishwasher. This household chore is nothing compared to the cleanup job he faced 2 years ago after Superstorm Sandy destroyed his Massapequa home.
I came home and the house was just a wreck. Everything was strewn all over the place. You could see the water lines. It was just a soggy mess.
His wife, Beth, is convinced they wouldn't be home today if it wasn't for the group New York Says Thank You.
We would still be waiting for New York Rising because I'm still dealing with them and it's a nightmare. Most of my friends are still not home. We didn't have enough money from insurance. We had $51,000 from insurance and we had over $120,000 worth of damage. We would absolutely 100% still not be home.
New York Says Thank You started in 2003 when 5-year-old Evan Parness told his dad he wanted to help the victims of the California wildfires. Evan's dad, Jeff, who lost a good friend on September 11th, thought it was a great idea. So the family loaded up a truck with a sign that says New York Says Thank You and drove it cross country.
It's our way of saying that New Yorkers will never forget what people from small towns all around the country and all around the world did for us in our time of need.
Every year since then, around the anniversary of 9/11, the foundation sends volunteers to a different community hit by disaster to rebuild. When Sandy hit, they didn't have to go far.
When we found out that Thursday after the storm that as many as 2,000 firefighters and police officers just lost their homes, we realized, these guys have made up the core of our volunteer network from the very beginning, and we got to go put them back in their homes because they're the last people to ever ask for help. And they're also the people who provide life-saving services for the rest of us.
People like Anthony, who's a member of the FDNY.
I thought it was great. I thought it was a miracle. I couldn't be happier, Just says a lot.
In less than a week, this group of complete strangers not only restored their home, they also restored their hope.
They're incredible. They call it a dysfunctional family, but they are the most amazing people. To give up days to work from hours, they put in so much heart and manual labor for absolute strangers, and they don't ask for anything. They don't ask for thanks. They don't ask to pay back to them. It's just to pay it forward.
So that's what they did. In September, the entire Henry family went to Oklahoma with New York Says Thank You to help out after deadly tornadoes hit. They joined hundreds of volunteers to help the owner of an animal rescue and therapeutic riding center rebuild.
There were hundreds of people there. I don't know how many hundreds, but there were hundreds of people there working towards one thing, and that was to help her. But it was not just to help her, it's to help her community.
Why do you think it was important to go on this trip?
To help the people because they helped us.
And like so many others, the Henry family says they will continue to do that.
What they did for our house is, it can never be paid back. You just have to keep paying it forward. You can never pay it back.
That's the beauty of New York Says Thank You.
What's so special about New York Says Thank You is it's not just New Yorkers. It's people from every small town that we've ever helped over 10 years. Every year they keep showing up to help the next community as their way to pay it forward.
A dysfunctional family made up of people who have survived disasters, helping others do the same.
You can't describe it. Complete strangers, not just helping you out, for the day or holding a door open for you. Like, they're changing your life.
I'm Christine Persichetti, FiOS 1 News.
It's been 2 long years since Sandy changed all of our lives. And as we've shown you, much progress has been made, but there's still more work to do. We'll continue to bring you stories of recovery and rebuilding. For everyone at FiOS 1 News, we thank you for joining us. I'm Mike Gilliam. Good night.